As you've probably heard, Peru is now on its 6th president in the last 5 years after its most recent ex-head of state, Pedro Castillo, was arrested and impeached following a televised speech on December 7th in which a shaking Castillo announced his intentions to dissolve Congress and seize absolute power in the country through what amounted to a self-coup. Later on that same day, Dina Boluarte, Castillo's ex-vice president, was sworn into the presidency until 2026, becoming Peru's first female head of state. However, the debacle surrounding the attempted self-coup was just the beginning of the drama in the South American nation. In the week or so since his removal from office, pro-Castillo protests, in which 21 people have died, have erupted around Peru. The ex-president has been sentenced to 18 months of preventative detention, and the newly in charge Boluarte has had to declare a state of emergency across the entire country. But how did we get here? And what is it about Peru's political system that has created such instability in the country? These are 3 keys to understand the recently attempted self-coup in Peru. Number 1. A problematic and broken Congress. According to Juan Diego Quesada, correspondent for the Spanish newspaper El País in South America, Peru's Congress, which currently has an 86% disapproval rating, is the maximum expression of corruption in the country. Peru doesn't have traditional political parties like in the US, the UK, or Canada, for example. The political system in the country is instead made up of dozens of tiny parties, all of whom have their own agendas that can change on a whim. The effect that this creates is that instead of having a Congress made up of politicians with clear positions that represent the wants and needs of the electorate, congressmen in Peru instead answer to lobbyists, corporations, and the country's richest people. According to Quesada, Congress in Peru actively works against the country's presidents in an effort to preserve the status quo and prevent political change. Number 2. A deep desire for political change within the population. Years of instability and economic inequality have resulted in a deep-seated desire for political reform within the Peruvian population. Over the last 20 years, every president elected in the country has run on a platform of change. Unfortunately, due to Congress's unwillingness to work with presidents on their projects, as well as deep-rooted corruption all throughout Peruvian politics, achieving said change has not been easy. As previously mentioned, Peru has had 6 different presidents since 2018, 4 of which have been forced out of office amid scandal. Martín Vizcarra, who ruled for a little over 2.5 years, lasted the longest. His successor, Manuel Merino, on the other hand, was only president for 5 days. Nonetheless, in the midst of a surging COVID-19 pandemic and social unrest due to lockdowns and increased food and oil prices, the search for something new in Peruvian politics continued in April 2021 when, against all odds, a little-known leftist union leader and ex-teacher from rural northern Peru won the presidential elections. His name, you guessed it, was Pedro Castillo. Number 3. An incompetent and unstable president. Castillo won the presidency by a very small margin, receiving 50.13% of the vote, largely supported by the country's rural population outside of the normal Peruvian political bubble in Lima. Upon beginning his mandate, though, it rapidly became obvious that the ex-union leader's plans for Peru were less than clear. In his 17 months as president, Castillo went through over 70 different ministers as he attempted to find the right balance of political allies to ensure that Congress couldn't oust him through impeachment, something that they tried multiple times and ultimately succeeded at. What began as a leftist discourse for change quickly transformed as Castillo assigned members of the extreme right to his cabinet and an anti-vaxxer to the Ministry of Health. While Castillo cycled through ministers, Congress dedicated themselves to shooting down as many of his laws and projects as possible, even blocking him from leaving the country multiple times for meetings during the last weeks of his presidency. Ultimately, as we all know, Castillo's harsh words turned out to be a case of the pot accusing the kettle of a coup d'etat, and he now finds himself in a Lima prison from which he has repeatedly claimed that he's a victim of political persecution. For more information about what's going on in Peru and the sources for this video, please check out the links in the bio.